Have you ever found yourself standing in a crowded place, feeling invisible, yet at the very center of a moment that refuses to be ignored? Today's story might resonate with you in ways you didn't expect. If you appreciate stories that explore courage, justice, and the strength it takes to stand tall when the world seems to push back, consider subscribing to this channel so we can share those journeys together. The airport buzzed with its familiar chaos. Travelers shuffled hurriedly, announcements crackled over loudspeakers, and rolling suitcases rattled across polished floors. Families tried to keep pace with tired children. Business travelers stared down at glowing screens, plotting the next move on their tight schedules. Amid the bustle, one man moved with a steady purpose. Colonel David Carter was no stranger to order and discipline. Clad in his pristine military uniform, every medal and ribbon told a story of sacrifice, dedication, and duty. His boots clicked sharply, cutting through the ambient noise as he made his way toward the airline counter. But behind his calm exterior lay a quiet storm, a mix of grief, resolve, and an unyielding sense of responsibility. This was no ordinary trip. Carter carried with him the weight of a promise, a sacred mission to escort the remains of Private First Class Jason Reynolds, a young soldier who had given everything for his country. Jason was just 21, a life brimming with dreams and hopes extinguished too soon. As Carter approached the counter, the usual rhythm of travel seemed to falter. The agent barely looked up, her fingers hesitating on the keyboard before she finally spoke. "Sir, there's an issue with your ticket." Carter's brow furrowed, but his voice remained steady. "I'm escorting the remains of a fallen soldier. All documents are in order." Her eyes flickered nervously. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's a security protocol preventing boarding at this time." Behind him, the line shifted. Passengers paused, sensing the unusual tension. An army colonel denied a flight? Whispers rippled through the crowd. Carter squared his shoulders, refusing to back down. "Which protocol exactly? I've completed missions like this before without issue." The agent's smile was tight, rehearsed. "It's just policy, sir. We can't override it." His jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "This isn't about me. It's about honoring a fallen brother." The murmurs grew louder. A man wearing a Marine Corps cap stepped forward. "I've been through security hundreds of times. I've never seen protocol stop a soldier escorting one of our own." Phones appeared, cameras clicked, and a young woman started streaming live. The crowd's energy shifted, no longer just passengers waiting to board, but witnesses to an unfolding injustice. Social media erupted as the story spread. Veteran groups issued statements. News outlets scrambled to cover the incident. The airline scrambled too, offering vague apologies and promises to fix the misunderstanding. But Carter knew this was bigger than an apology. It was a fight for respect, for dignity, for the basic decency owed to those who serve. Eventually, military officials intervened, arranging a private flight. The mission was completed, but the scars remained on Carter, on the system, and on everyone who witnessed the struggle. This was more than a denied boarding. It was a public stand against injustice and a reminder that sometimes, to honor the fallen, the living must fight their own battles. Colonel David Carter's fingers rested lightly on the worn leather folder that contained all the official documents he had prepared with care. Military orders, identification, and authorization papers. Each sheet carried weight far beyond paper. Each represented a sacred duty he was sworn to uphold. Today, he wasn't just a traveler. He was a guardian of a solemn promise. to escort Private First Class Jason Reynolds home. The airline counter was busy, the usual drone of voices mingling with the constant hum of overhead announcements. Carter stepped forward, his presence commanding a subtle respect, though most faces barely glanced his way. The agent behind the counter barely looked up as he laid his documents down. For a moment, everything seemed routine. Then, without warning, the agent's fingers hesitated. Her eyes flicked up, narrowing slightly. "Sir," she said carefully, "there seems to be an issue with your ticket." Carter's jaw tightened. "An issue?" he asked evenly, not one to lose composure. She hesitated, glanced sideways to a coworker, then back. "I'm sorry, but due to security protocols, we cannot permit you to board at this time." The words struck Carter like a cold wave. Security protocols? Which specifically? He asked, voice steady but firm. "I have escorted fallen comrades before, with all proper documentation." The agent offered a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I understand, sir, but there is nothing I can do. It's policy." Behind him, the line shifted, and whispers began to spread. People started looking. The presence of a uniformed colonel being denied boarding wasn't something they expected to witness on an ordinary day. Carter stood tall, his shoulders squared, his voice calm but insistent. "I'm performing a military duty. This is not a personal trip." The agent glanced nervously toward her supervisor, who soon appeared. A man in his mid-50s with a stern expression that tried to mask the uncertainty beneath. "Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience," the supervisor said. "However, there are procedures we must follow. Unfortunately, we cannot override them." Carter's frustration simmered. He had faced hostile environments, hostile governments, and hostile forces. But this felt different. Impersonal and bureaucratic. Masking something deeper, he pressed on. "I know the rules. There is no policy preventing me from boarding. Please be honest. What is the real reason?" The supervisor shifted, eyes darting as if searching for an excuse. "It's an extra security measure. Nothing personal." Carter's jaw clenched, but he held back anger. He was no stranger to vague explanations used to mask bias or fear. Meanwhile, the passengers behind him were growing restless. Phones appeared, cameras clicked, and quiet murmurs turned to whispered questions. A few people exchanged glances, pulling out their devices. The tension in the air was palpable. Suddenly, a voice rose from the crowd. A man wearing a Marine Corps baseball cap stepped forward. "I've been through security more times than I can count," the Marine said, voice steady and firm. "Never once has protocol stopped a soldier escorting the remains of one of our own." The supervisor's expression tightened, but he said nothing. The Marine's words resonated with the crowd. More whispers spread. Some passengers nodded in agreement. Then a young woman nearby raised her phone, streaming live. "He's being denied boarding while escorting a fallen soldier. This is unbelievable," she said calmly but clearly. The live stream quickly gained viewers among those waiting nearby and beyond. The airline agent behind the counter seemed rattled, stealing anxious glances at the phones recording her every move. Carter felt a flicker of hope. Public attention might force transparency. The crowd's mood shifted. Passengers who had been focused on their own journeys now witnessed a man fighting not just for himself, but for respect and justice. Some stepped closer, voices low but supportive. Others simply recorded silently, knowing these moments mattered. Minutes ticked by with no resolution. The airline staff whispered among themselves, their discomfort growing. Then the airport announcement crackled through. "Attention passengers. Flight 237 to Phoenix is delayed due to unforeseen circumstances. Groans filled the terminal, but most people barely noticed. Their focus was elsewhere, on a lone colonel standing tall amidst an invisible battle. Outside, social media erupted. Videos from the live stream spread rapidly across platforms. Veteran organizations issued statements condemning the airline's actions. News outlets picked up the story, headlines blaring about a military escort denied boarding. The airline's carefully crafted narrative began to unravel. Back at the counter, the supervisor tried to regain control. "We are working to resolve the issue," he said, voice tight. But the damage was done. Carter's calm resolve inspired the crowd. He refused to be broken by vague excuses or hidden biases. The passengers who had spoken up had changed the tone. What had been a quiet denial was now a public demand for justice, and Carter wasn't alone. The Marine veteran stood beside him, offering quiet support. The young woman continued streaming, her voice unwavering. Together, they turned a moment of personal trial into a public stand. Hours later, military officials arrived, their presence commanding immediate respect. Major Thomas Beckett introduced himself briskly. "We have arranged a private military flight for Colonel Carter and the remains he escorts." Relief washed over Carter, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this should never have been necessary. As he boarded the private aircraft, Carter reflected on the ordeal. This was more than a mission. It was a statement, a challenge to a system that allowed disrespect to creep in beneath the surface. That he knew the fight was far from over. The dignity owed to those who serve must be fiercely defended. The support of strangers, the power of public witnessing, and the courage to stand firm had turned the tide. But the true victory would be when such battles no longer needed to be fought. The tension in the terminal was thick enough to cut with a knife. Colonel David Carter stood at the airline counter, his face a mask of calm resolve. But inside, a storm of frustration and disbelief raged. The flag-draped casket beside him wasn't just cargo. It was a sacred trust he was sworn to protect, a brother in arms who deserved dignity in death around him. The murmur of the crowd grew louder, morphing from whispers to hushed conversations filled with disbelief and anger. Phones were raised, cameras trained, and live streams broadcasted the unfolding drama to the world. What had started as a routine security check had spiraled into a public spectacle, one that no one in the terminal could ignore. Carter felt the weight of every gaze, every phone pointed at him. But he did not waver. Years of military discipline had taught him patience and resilience. This was another battlefield, one fought not with weapons, but with dignity and truth. The airline staff behind the counter looked increasingly uncomfortable. The agent who had first denied him boarding seemed to shrink under the scrutiny, fingers frozen over the keyboard as her eyes darted nervously to the growing crowd and the glowing screens recording her every move. The supervisor, once so confident, now avoided Carter's gaze. He muttered about protocols and security concerns. But the words rang hollow. The crowd sensed it too. This was no simple procedural matter. A Marine veteran who had stood nearby stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a clarion call. "I've seen many things in my time," he said firmly, "but never would I expect a soldier escorting a fallen comrade to be treated with such disrespect." The crowd's attention sharpened. Some nodded, others murmured agreement. The terminal had transformed from a place of transit into a theater of justice. Then, from the back of the crowd, a young woman's voice rang out clearly, steady despite the charged atmosphere. "I'm live streaming this. People need to see what's happening here." Her phone's camera captured every moment, every interaction, every faltering excuse. The airline's attempts to control the narrative crumbled under the pressure of public witness. Social media exploded with outrage as the story went viral. Veteran groups and advocacy organizations rallied, demanding accountability. Carter's heart ached. Not from the fight itself, but from the realization that respect for those who serve is still a fragile thing, easily shattered by fear or prejudice. He thought of Private First Class Jason Reynolds, the young soldier whose life had been cut short, whose family waited for his return. Would they understand this indignity? Would they see this as part of his final journey? The answer, Carter hoped, would be no. Amid the mounting pressure, a military official appeared. A man in a crisp suit with an air of authority. Major Thomas Beckett's presence was a turning point. "We've arranged a private military flight," Beckett announced firmly. "Colonel Carter and the remains will not fly commercial." A wave of relief washed over Carter. The mission could proceed, the promise kept. But the battle had taken its toll as the crowd dispersed. Carter remained rooted, absorbing the magnitude of the moment. He saw the faces of strangers, some supportive, some shocked, and felt the strength of collective witness. This was more than a denied boarding. It was a call to action, a demand for respect that transcended policy. He knew this story would linger, a reminder that honor must be defended every day, in every place, even an airport terminal. The engines of the military plane roared to life as Carter prepared to board. The flag beside him fluttered gently, a symbol of sacrifice and resilience. Looking out at the sky, Carter felt a mix of exhaustion and determination. This mission was complete, but the fight for justice, for dignity, was ongoing. He would carry this lesson forward, not just as a soldier, but as a guardian of the respect owed to those who give everything. The hum of the military transport plane filled the air, steady and purposeful. Colonel David Carter sat quietly, the flag-draped casket of Private First Class Jason Reynolds secured beside him, a silent companion on this final journey. Outside, the world continued unaware of the solemn mission unfolding within the aircraft's cabin. For Carter, this was more than a flight. It was the fulfillment of a promise, the carrying of a burden that no words could fully express. As the plane climbed higher, Carter's thoughts drifted back to the airport terminal. The moment of confrontation that had sparked a public outcry and exposed a fracture in how respect and dignity are extended to those who serve. The denial of boarding, cloaked in vague policies and security protocols, was more than a bureaucratic error. It was a painful reminder that honor cannot be taken for granted. He exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in his body begin to ease. Yet the weight of the ordeal lingered. The journey to bring Jason home had been marred by resistance, misunderstanding, and a quiet struggle against an impersonal system. But in the midst of it all, Carter found strength. Not just in his own resolve, but in the solidarity of strangers who refused to look away. Upon arrival, Carter was met by a small, respectful group, family members, military personnel, and chaplains, each carrying their own grief and hope. Jason's parents stood with quiet dignity, their eyes reflecting a mix of sorrow and pride. They had waited, endured, and now, finally, their son was home. Carter approached them with a solemn nod, the years of service and sacrifice etched into every line of his face. "Jason served with courage," he said softly. "Today, we bring him home with the honor he deserves." The ceremony was simple but profound. The flag was carefully folded and presented, a symbol of a nation's gratitude and a family's enduring love. The room was thick with emotion, silent tears mingling with whispered prayers. Later, alone, Carter reflected on the meaning of this mission. The battle to escort a fallen soldier home had been fought on many fronts, some visible, others hidden. It was a fight for respect, for justice, and for the affirmation that every life given in service matters deeply. The airline's denial had been a bitter blow, an unexpected challenge that tested more than patience. It revealed the fragility of respect, how easily it can be eroded by fear, ignorance, or systemic failure. Yet the public's response, the voices that rose in support, reminded Carter that dignity is not only a right but a responsibility shared by all. Messages of encouragement poured in, from veterans, civilians, advocacy groups, and strangers moved by the story. Their words fueled a commitment within Carter to continue fighting, not just on battlefields but in everyday life, advocating for those whose voices might otherwise go unheard. The airline faced its own reckoning. Stock prices dropped, boycotts grew, and lawsuits were filed. Executives issued statements promising reforms, but Carter remained cautious. Words alone were not enough. Real change required accountability and action. Back home, Carter visited Jason's grave, the earth freshly turned and adorned with simple flowers. Kneeling, he whispered a vow, not just for Jason but for all who had fallen. "To honor you is to fight for those who come after." The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the quiet cemetery. In that stillness, Carter felt a renewed sense of purpose. The mission might have ended, but the journey toward true respect and dignity for all who serve was far from over. He thought of the airport terminal, the crowd that had refused to stay silent, the strangers who had become allies in a moment of injustice. Their courage was a beacon, a reminder that justice is a collective effort, and in that truth lay hope. For Carter, the greatest lesson was clear. The fight for honor does not end with the fallen. It lives on in the actions of the living with steady steps and a resolute heart. He carried that promise forward into every day, every mission, and every life touched by service. In the quiet moments after the storm has passed, we often find the deepest truths. Colonel David Carter's journey is one such truth, a story not just about a denied boarding or a viral incident, but about what it means to stand up for respect, dignity, and justice in the face of indifference. This story reminds us that honor is fragile. It is not guaranteed by uniforms or titles, but earned through courage, both in grand gestures and in quiet resilience. Carter's steadfastness, the support of strangers who refuse to look away, and the power of collective witness show us that respect must be actively protected. We live in a world where the sacrifices of those who serve can sometimes be overshadowed by bureaucracy, prejudice, or complacency. Yet, stories like this illuminate the path forward, a path where dignity is unconditional, where every life given in service is cherished. The airport terminal, once a place of transit and noise, became a stage for justice. Ordinary people became guardians of that justice by speaking out, recording, and standing in solidarity. This moment offers us a challenge and an invitation to examine how we honor those who serve, not only in words but in deeds, to consider the times we stay silent when respect is denied, and to find the courage to speak up. In the end, it is not the grand moments, but the small acts, the hugs shared in grief, the steady presence beside a fallen comrade, the voices raised in support, that carry the deepest meaning. If something inside you stirred as this story ended, please subscribe, not just to follow a storyteller, but so we can preserve the fragile beauty of life together. Because every voice matters, every act of courage counts, and in our shared stories, we find the strength to build a more just and compassionate world.